You don't belong up here. 5 words spoken in a venomous whisper that would unravel a career, expose an industry's darkest secrets, and ignite a firestorm that would change American aviation forever. Her name was Eleanor Richardson. At 18, she was a freshman at Stanford studying aerospace engineering, and on this particular day, she was simply trying to get home to Atlanta for her father's birthday. The carry-on bag in her hand was regulation size, the same one she had flown with dozens of times before. She arrived at Seattle's Gate 47 dressed in a Stanford hoodie and jeans, her locks pulled back in a ponytail adorned with gold cuffs. The gate agent, Derek Chen, scanned her pass without issue. "Miss Thompson, first class, seat 2B. Have a great flight." Thompson was her mother's maiden name, a small measure of anonymity Eleanor had used since she was 16. Not to hide, but to be seen as just another passenger, to be treated like everyone else. As she walked down the jet bridge, she noticed the flight attendant at the aircraft door, Veronica Pierce, greeting passengers with a warm, practiced smile. She was 42, with 18 years of experience, and she exuded a genuine warmth as she helped an elderly couple. But the moment Eleanor stepped forward, the warmth evaporated. Veronica's smile vanished, her eyes turning to ice as they swept over Eleanor from head to toe. "Boarding pass," she said, her tone flat, devoid of any greeting. Eleanor politely handed it over. Veronica stared at it for an unnaturally long time before asking, accusingly, "First class, seat 2B?" Then came the first salvo. "That bag is too large. You'll need to check it." Eleanor, who had just seen Veronica welcome a businessman with an even larger bag, replied respectfully, "This bag meets the requirements. I've flown with it many times." Veronica's jaw tightened. "I'm the authority on this aircraft, young lady. Don't argue with me." The interrogation escalated. "How old are you? It seems unusual for someone your age to be in first class alone." "I'm 18, Eleanor answered, a knot of confusion and dread forming in her stomach. "I don't see how that's relevant." "Did your parents buy this ticket? Is this someone else's account?" Eleanor explained it was a family account under her mother's name, but Veronica's suspicion only deepened. She demanded Eleanor's ID, then held it up to the light with exaggerated scrutiny. "Your pass says Thompson, your ID says Richardson. So you are using someone else's credit card to purchase expensive tickets?" The accusation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her. "It's my family's account," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "This is inappropriate." That's when Veronica leaned in, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Trafficking is a serious problem. Young girls traveling alone on tickets they claim they didn't pay for." The implication was devastating, a degrading suggestion aimed at a college student with textbooks in her bag. Humiliated but trying to remain calm, Eleanor found her voice. "I'm a Stanford student going home to my family. This is completely out of line." Behind her, an impatient passenger called out, "Just check the bag and sit down. Some of us have connections to make." Seeing her opportunity, Veronica raised her voice for the entire cabin to hear. "I apologize for the disruption. We have an uncooperative passenger." Eleanor realized she was being gaslit, painted as the aggressor. She pulled out her phone to document the encounter. "I'm filing a formal complaint. You've accused me of theft and made degrading insinuations." And that's when Veronica said the words that laid her prejudice bare. "You're trying to make this about race. You people always play that card." Before Eleanor could react, Veronica snatched the phone from her hand. "You can't take my property!" Eleanor cried, reaching for it. Veronica stepped back, seizing the moment to shout, "She's assaulting me. Everyone saw it. She tried to attack me." It was a calculated lie. The gate agent reappeared as Veronica delivered her final threat. "Deplane now or I'll have security remove you. I will see to it you're banned from this airline for life. Put on the no-fly list. Those college trips to Stanford? Over. Try taking a 40-hour bus ride." Terrified, Eleanor pleaded, "Please, just give me my phone back." And that's when Veronica placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder and pushed. Eleanor stumbled backward, her foot catching on the threshold of the aircraft. She fell, her body tumbling down the steep incline of the jet bridge ramp. The sound of her body hitting the metal grating was sickening. Her head cracked against the steel, her knee tore open, and her shoulder twisted violently. her belongings scattered as she came to rest in a crumpled, bleeding heap at the bottom, barely conscious. The cabin erupted in screams, but from the top of the ramp, Veronica's voice cut through the chaos. She's faking it. She refused to follow instructions. Through a haze of pain, Eleanor knew she had to make one call. As paramedics rushed to her side, an airport security officer, Patricia Morales, helped find her phone. "Who do you need to call, honey?" she asked gently. "My dad," Eleanor whispered through a split lip. Morales found the contact and dialed. A man's warm voice answered. "Eleanor, baby, you should be in the air by now. Is everything okay?" At the sound of his voice, Eleanor's composure shattered. "Dad," she sobbed, "something happened. At the airport." A pause, then two words that would change everything. "Your airport." Eleanor's father was not just any concerned parent. He was Robert Richardson, the CEO of Skybridge Airlines, the flight attendant who had just brutalized a passenger for being young and black in first class, had done so to the CEO's daughter, on his airline, at his airport, and she had no idea. But what should terrify us all is this. If this is how they treated the CEO's daughter when no one knew who she was, just imagine how they treat everyone else. Within minutes, the full force of the incident began to unfold. Paramedics confirmed Eleanor's injuries were serious: a concussion, a deep laceration on her knee requiring 12 stitches, a severely sprained shoulder, and contusions across her body. As they transported her to the hospital, passengers were already giving statements to Officer Morales, their accounts universally corroborating Eleanor's. One passenger, Sarah Chen, quietly approached the officer. "I recorded the entire interaction," she said. "All 8 minutes of it. Do you need it?" Meanwhile, in his corner office in Atlanta, Robert Richardson felt a cold rage consume him. He had spent 40 years clawing his way up in an industry that never wanted him, starting as a baggage handler and facing discrimination at every turn. He had built Skybridge on the principle of respect for every single passenger. And now, the system he built had catastrophically failed the person he loved most. He called his chief operating officer. "Marcus, I need all security footage from SeaTac Gate 47 immediately. A flight attendant assaulted a passenger. That passenger is Eleanor." There was a stunned silence on the line. "You're Eleanor? Your daughter?" "Yes. Get me everything. And ground that flight attendant. Effective this second." Back at the airport, the evidence was undeniable. Security footage clearly showed Veronica's shift in demeanor, the aggressive interrogation, and the moment she placed her hand on Eleanor's shoulder and shoved her with obvious force. Veronica Pierce was arrested and charged with assault and theft, but the official investigation was already being outpaced by the court of public opinion. Another passenger, Jason Webb, posted a video to Twitter, his caption a confession. "I told a girl to just check her bag and stop holding up the flight. Then I watched a flight attendant push her down a ramp. She's 18 years old. She was right. I was wrong, and I'm gonna have to live with that." The video exploded. What Veronica Pierce didn't know was that her actions would spark congressional hearings, destroy careers, and force an entire industry to confront the racism it had swept under the rug for decades. The story of Eleanor Richardson was just beginning, and the reckoning was coming. But then another passenger, Sarah Chen, who had recorded the entire interaction from her seat, saw Jason's video and realized the world was seeing a dangerously incomplete picture. She uploaded her own footage, all 8 uncut minutes of it, with a caption that acted as a lightning rod. Full context. This flight attendant harassed an 18-year-old black girl from the moment she tried to board, questioned her age, accused her of credit card fraud, made degrading insinuations about trafficking, stole her phone, lied about being assaulted, then pushed her down the ramp. Watch the whole thing. This is discrimination, this is racism, this is unacceptable. Sarah's video didn't just go viral, it detonated. By the end of the day, it had crested 3 million views, its comment section a raging torrent of outrage and grim recognition. "That poor girl was so polite through all of that abuse," one comment read. "This is exactly what we mean when we talk about being treated differently. Watch how she greeted white passengers versus how she treated Eleanor." National news outlets scrambled to cover the story within hours, but they were all missing the one detail that would transform a viral firestorm into a full-blown national crisis. At 6 o'clock Pacific Time, Seattle Times reporter Amanda Foster published the bombshell. Skybridge passenger assaulted by flight attendant is CEO's daughter. Eleanor Richardson was traveling under mother's maiden name to avoid special treatment. The article explained that Eleanor had been booking flights as Eleanor Thompson since she was 16, wanting to experience her father's airline as a regular passenger, to learn the unvarnished truth of how people were treated. The revelation landed like a bomb on every social media platform. Twitter didn't just erupt, it fractured. His own daughter? The CEO's daughter was assaulted on his own airline? If this is how they treated the CEO's kid when nobody knew who she was, imagine how they treat everyone else. While Robert Richardson was somewhere over the Midwest, unreachable at 35,000 feet, his second-in-command, Marcus Chen, was waging war from a conference room at Skybridge headquarters. He had assembled the emergency response team, the HR director, Angela Foster, the chief legal counsel, and a team of investigators, and they were now staring with growing horror at Veronica Pierce's employment file. Angela began to read the complaints aloud, and with each file, the weight in her voice grew heavier, dragging the air out of the room. Complaint 1, she began. Filed 3 years ago. Black male passenger, Marcus Jenkins, claimed Veronica refused to believe he was in the correct first-class seat. Asked to see his ID 3 times and questioned how he could afford the ticket. Resolution. Passenger given a $200 voucher. Complaint marked resolved. She continued. Complaint 2. Latina passenger Sofia Ramirez claimed Veronica made comments about her English proficiency. Resolution. $150 voucher. Complaint resolved. She read through complaints 3 through 9, each one a carbon copy of the last. A passenger of color, discriminatory treatment, and regional management, making the problem disappear with a voucher. A cold fury coiled in Marcus's gut. 9, he said, his voice dangerously low. 9 complaints in 3 years, all from passengers of color. And she's still wearing our uniform? Why wasn't she fired after the 3rd? Angela looked ill. Regional management is partly evaluated on how few incidents escalate to corporate. If they resolve complaints with vouchers, it looks like efficient problem solving. They were incentivized to bury this. Marcus demanded they widen the search. What they found was a graveyard. 347 complaints alleging discriminatory treatment across the airline in 3 years. 89% of them dismissed at the regional level with a voucher. Data showed that complaints from passengers of color were nearly 5 times more likely to be dismissed than similar complaints from white passengers. The truth was sickeningly clear. The airline hadn't been solving problems. It had been systematically buying the silence of its victims for years. "We've been covering this up," Marcus said, the words tasting like ash, "at scale. And Eleanor's case was simply the first one that became too loud to ignore." In that moment, Marcus made a command decision. He immediately grounded Veronica Pierce. He suspended the entire Seattle regional management team responsible for burying her complaints, and he ordered an independent third-party investigation into every complaint filed in the past 5 years. "Robert's daughter is in the hospital because we failed," Marcus told the stunned team. "That ends tonight." And here, the story truly begins. Before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next won't just shake an airline, it will rattle the entire aviation industry to its foundations. Robert Richardson's response to his daughter's ordeal will change everything. So hit that subscribe button and ask yourself, if you were in Marcus's position, discovering this systemic cover-up, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. When Robert Richardson's plane touched down in Seattle at 10:47 p.m., the story had become a national inferno. The moment he switched on his phone, it was flooded with a digital tidal wave. 47 missed calls, over 200 texts, and endless requests for comment. He ignored them all, his eyes scanning for one name, Aunt Diane. Her text was all that mattered. "She's stable, concussion, sprained shoulder, 12 stitches, sleeping now. ER Base 7, I'm with her." He went straight to the hospital, still in the Stanford sweatshirt he'd thrown on in his haste to leave Atlanta. But when he stepped through the door into the sterile quiet of Eleanor's room and saw his daughter, his brilliant, vibrant daughter, lying small and broken in that hospital bed, her face bruised and swollen, her arm in a sling, something inside of him fractured, a hairline crack in his soul that would never fully heal. He sat carefully on the edge of her bed, taking her uninjured hand in his. The gentle movement stirred her. "Daddy?" she whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "You came." Tears fell openly down Robert's face. "Of course I came. Always, baby. Always." Eleanor dissolved into sobs against his shoulder as he held her, his touch a delicate shield around her injuries. "I did everything right, Dad," she wept. "Everything you taught me, and it didn't matter. Nothing mattered." Robert's voice was a raw mix of anguish and steel. "You deserved none of it," he whispered. "Not 1 second. This was not your fault." He sat with Eleanor through the night as she slept fitfully, her body twitching in pain. In the quiet hours before dawn, she woke and told him everything. Every accusation, every humiliation. Robert listened without interruption, his expression hardening into a mask of cold fury, his heart breaking with every word. "Why did she hate me so much, Dad?" Eleanor asked, her voice small. "What did I do?" "You didn't do anything," Robert said, his voice fierce. "Her hate has nothing to do with you. But this is my failure. I built a system that allowed someone like her to keep hurting people. That's on me." Once she was asleep again, Robert stepped into the hall and called Marcus for a full report. The words that came through the phone were devastating. 9 complaints against Veronica Pierce, all dismissed. 347 discrimination complaints airline-wide, buried by a system that rewarded managers for buying silence. Robert felt a wave of nausea. "How many?" he asked Marcus, his voice hollow. "How many passengers did we fail? How many other Eleanors are out there, whose stories we never heard because we paid them to go away?" "I've suspended the entire Seattle regional team," Marcus reported. "What are your orders?" Robert's grief had hardened into resolve. His voice was cold iron. "Get the board, Sunday morning, 6 a.m. My time, 9 a.m. Eastern. Attendance is not optional. I'm not hiding from this, Marcus. We are going to own all of it." At 6 a.m. Sunday morning, 8 board members materialized on video screens. Robert, still at the hospital in his sweatshirt, laid out the unvarnished truth. Veronica's file, the systemic pattern of dismissals, the chilling data showing passengers of color were nearly 5 times more likely to have their complaints ignored. The board stared back in stunned silence. The CFO, Thomas Liu, spoke first. "Robert, I am deeply sympathetic, but we must consider liability. Admitting systemic failure opens us up to massive legal exposure." Robert cut him off, his tone glacial. "Good. Let them. We should be liable. We failed these people. We hurt them. It's time we paid for it." He then outlined his plan. Immediate termination of Veronica Pierce and the regional managers who enabled her. A full independent audit of all procedures. A new passenger advocacy office reporting directly to the CEO. Mandatory, in-person anti-bias training for every employee, and a $50 million investment to make it all happen. Board member Gregory Hamilton balked. "Robert, $50 million, plus lawsuits, plus the PR damage. The stock is already down 8%. Shareholders will revolt." "Then let them sell their shares," Robert shot back. "I will not run an airline that treats people the way my daughter was treated just to protect quarterly earnings." Thomas, the CFO, tried again. "Robert, I must advise against admitting fault so publicly." "Then note your objection for the minutes," Robert said, "because we are doing this." Then, Patricia O'Neill, a major shareholder, spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I met Eleanor at the company picnic. She is a brilliant, kind young woman. And one of our employees did this to her? I support Robert's plan. Every part of it." The tide turned. The vote was called. 6 in favor. Thomas and Gregory abstained. "Motion carries," the chairwoman announced. "Robert, you have our full support." Later that morning, Eleanor made a decision. Against her father's wishes, she asked her aunt to help her sit up in bed. Wincing through the pain, she held up her phone and recorded a 4-minute video. Her face was bruised, her arm in a sling, but her voice was clear and strong. "Hi, my name is Eleanor Richardson. I'm 18 years old, and I'm a freshman at Stanford studying aerospace engineering. 2 days ago, I was assaulted by a Skybridge Airlines flight attendant." She told her story directly, holding nothing back. "I'm making this video because I'm not special," she said. "Yes, I'm the CEO's daughter, and that's why my story is getting attention. But what happened to me happens every single day to people who don't look like they belong in certain spaces. Her voice, thick with emotion, grew stronger. I was polite. I was respectful. I followed every rule. And none of it mattered. Because the moment she saw my face, she had already decided I didn't belong. She looked straight into the camera. But I want everyone watching to know, you do belong. In first class, in college, in any space where people try to make you feel like you don't. That is their failure, not yours. Their racism, their bias, their problem. Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. My dad built this airline on principles of respect and equality, and his own company failed me anyway. That should tell you how deep this problem goes. It's not about one hateful person. It's about systems that protect them. She finished with unwavering strength. The bruises will heal, but the systems that allowed this to happen, those need to change. And I'm going to spend every day fighting to make sure they do. She made her private Instagram account public and posted the video with a simple caption, "My truth." The video didn't just spread, it ignited. 100,000 views in 30 minutes, 2 million in 2 hours. By the time the sun set, 20 million people had heard Eleanor Richardson's truth. Comments poured in. This young woman is incredibly brave. Every CEO should watch this and ask if their company would protect their child. That afternoon, Robert Richardson held a press conference in a hospital meeting room. He wore the same sweatshirt and jeans. This wasn't corporate, it was personal. He stepped to the microphone. The passenger who was assaulted on flight 2847 is my daughter, Eleanor Richardson. The room erupted. He held up a hand for silence. She travels under her mother's maiden name because she wants to be treated with basic dignity. Yesterday, we couldn't even provide that. He detailed every finding, softening nothing. The 9 complaints, the 347 buried reports, the systemic bias. This isn't just about one bigoted employee, Robert said, his voice heavy. This is about systemic failure. I built this airline, and I failed to ensure it lived up to its values. A reporter from the back shouted the inevitable question. Mr. Richardson, will you be resigning? If the board decides I am not the right person to lead this transformation, I will step down, Robert answered. But if they keep me, I will spend every single day fixing what is broken. Another reporter called out, some are saying this is being blown out of proportion. Do you think this is really about race? Robert's answer was direct and unflinching. Yes, let's stop dancing around the word. My daughter is a young black woman. She was treated differently from the moment she approached that door. The flight attendant who assaulted her has a documented pattern of complaints from passengers of color. This is about race. He announced the terminations, the $50 million investment, the public accountability. Some people will say we're overreacting, he continued, his voice rising. To them I say, watch the videos, look at my daughter's bruised face, then tell me we're overreacting. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. And let me be clear, this is not about my daughter getting justice because she is the CEO's kid. This is about creating a system where every passenger gets justice. Because if we cannot protect the most vulnerable among us, we don't deserve to fly. Before we continue, subscribe to this channel, because what happens next reveals how one family's pain can spark a revolution that transforms an entire industry. Hit that subscribe button, and let me ask you, if you were on that board of directors, would you have voted to spend $50 million? Drop your answer in the comments. Robert took no further questions. He walked out, leaving a room of stunned journalists scrambling to file their reports. The story was no longer just about an assault. It was about whether an American institution could truly reckon with its failures. Eleanor Richardson, from her hospital bed, had just sparked a fire that would change aviation forever. And this was only the beginning. 1 week later, Marcus Chen stood before 47 regional directors and managers at Skybridge headquarters. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Everyone knew their careers were hanging by a thread. Marcus didn't bother with pleasantries. He brought the audit findings up on the massive screen behind him. 347 discrimination complaints filed in 3 years, he began, letting the numbers hang in the air. 89% dismissed at your level with a voucher. Complaints from passengers of color, nearly 5 times more likely to be dismissed. He paused, his eyes scanning their faces. We created a system that rewarded you for sweeping discrimination under the rug. You got better bonuses for making incidents disappear. You were incentivized to make problems disappear instead of solving them. Marcus's voice cut through the sterile conference room. And because of the system we built, an 18-year-old girl ended up in a hospital. The new rules were a line drawn in the sand. All discrimination complaints would now go directly to a new passenger advocacy office, bypassing regional management entirely. Every report would trigger a real investigation, complete with witness interviews, pattern analysis, and a review of employee histories. Regional managers would no longer be judged on how few problems reached corporate, but on how effectively they identified and rooted out problematic behavior. Marcus's final words carried the weight of an executioner's sentence. Some of you in this room were part of the problem. You signed off on dismissals you knew were inadequate. You protected employees who should not be flying. We are reviewing every complaint from the past 5 years. If we find you deliberately covered up discrimination to protect your metrics, you're done. Not suspended. Done. 2 weeks after the assault, Veronica Pierce stood in King County Superior Court for her arraignment. Stripped of her uniform, she seemed to shrink in her civilian clothes, looking frail and far older than her 42 years. The charges were read aloud: assault in the 3rd degree, theft for taking Eleanor's phone, and false reporting for lying about being attacked. A plea deal had been arranged, its terms carefully reviewed and approved by Eleanor herself. Veronica would plead guilty to assault, and the other charges would be dropped. Her sentence was not a cage, but a crucible. 200 hours of community service with organizations serving communities of color, mandatory anger management, and implicit bias training, participation in a restorative justice session with Eleanor, if she agreed, and a requirement to speak publicly about her actions at industry events to turn her failure into a lesson for others. Before accepting the plea, Judge Kenji Yamamoto fixed Veronica with a stern gaze. Ms. Pierce, I have watched the video of your actions multiple times. I have read statements describing how you harassed a young woman for nearly 10 minutes before you assaulted her. The only reason you are not facing jail time is because the victim and her family specifically requested leniency. They believe in rehabilitation over retribution. I suggest you spend the rest of your life proving them right. 4 weeks after that terrible day, Eleanor agreed to meet her attacker. The restorative justice session was held in a neutral office space, facilitated by Dr. James Wilson, an expert in healing through dialogue. It was just the 3 of them. Eleanor's parents waited in an adjacent room, a silent bastion of support. Dr. Wilson began simply. Veronica, you requested this meeting. Why? Veronica's hands trembled. Because I owe Eleanor an apology, she began, her voice strained. A real one, not some court-ordered statement. I forced myself to watch the video over and over, trying to see what everyone else saw. I barely recognized that person. She finally met Eleanor's eyes. I want to tell you there were reasons. A bad divorce, stress over a promotion, just a terrible day. And all of that is true, but none of it is an excuse. Her voice broke. The truth is uglier. I saw a young black woman in first class, and a vile racist part of me thought, she doesn't belong here. I assumed she'd stolen the ticket, or gotten it through some sordid means. And every time you stood up for yourself, politely and correctly, it made me angrier, because you were exposing my prejudice in front of the white passengers I had instinctively decided mattered more. Eleanor sat perfectly still, absorbing every word. I took your phone, Veronica continued through tears, because I knew I was wrong, and I wanted to destroy the evidence. I lied about you assaulting me to justify my own violence. I pushed you because I wanted to punish you for not quietly accepting mistreatment, for not knowing your place. She looked directly at Eleanor, her face a mask of shame. I am so sorry. The words are not enough. They will never be enough. I hurt you physically, gave you injuries that needed stitches. But worse, I hurt you emotionally. I made you feel unsafe, unwelcome, less than human. I made you question your own worth. And I did it because of my racism. Not the loud, obvious kind, but the insidious poison that whispers that some people are less deserving of respect. Dr. Wilson turned to Eleanor. Would you like to respond? Eleanor's voice was steady, though heavy with remembered pain. The worst part wasn't the fall. It wasn't the concussion or the stitches. It was the gaslighting. You made me feel like I was crazy, like I was the problem. difficult, aggressive, disrespectful. And for a few terrible minutes, standing there on that jet bridge, I started to believe you. Her voice gained strength. I am a straight-A student at Stanford. My father built an airline from the ground up. I was raised to believe in my own worth and in my right to occupy any space I choose. In less than 10 minutes, you made me feel like I was nothing. She held Veronica's gaze. Tell me the truth. Would you have treated me that way if I were white? Veronica's answer was quiet and devastating. No, I wouldn't have. I have given difficult white passengers patience I never showed you. I have let them get away with actual aggression. The only difference was the color of your skin. That is the truth. Then there is one more thing I need from you, Eleanor said. I need you to tell this truth publicly, not just in this room, but to other flight attendants, to people with power over passengers. Tell them what you did and why. Make them understand that bias isn't just a word. It's in the choices you make when you think no one important is watching. I will, Veronica promised. I will do that for the rest of my career. Eleanor's case struck the aviation industry like a thunderclap. Skybridge's new passenger advocacy office, led by David Martinez, the same social worker who had helped Eleanor at the hospital, processed over 4,000 complaints in its first 3 months. They found merit in 61%, leading to retraining, suspensions, and for 14 employees with documented patterns of discrimination, termination. Seeing the public outcry, other airlines scrambled to follow. Within 6 months, American Airlines had created an independent passenger rights office, Delta had implemented mandatory quarterly bias training, and United had overhauled its entire complaint system. Under pressure from Congress, the FAA announced new regulations requiring all airlines to publicly report discrimination statistics. 6 months after that day in December, Eleanor Richardson, now 19, was invited to testify before the Senate Commerce Committee. She sat before the senators, poised and professional in a tailored blazer, no longer a victim, but an advocate. Ms. Richardson, Senator Patricia Williams began, in your own words, please tell this committee what happened. Eleanor told her story, not as a traumatized teenager, but as a powerful voice demanding change. The room was silent. When she finished, another senator asked, your father implemented significant changes at Skybridge. Do you believe they are sufficient? They are a necessary start, Eleanor replied, her voice firm. But sufficiency requires constant vigilance. A policy is meaningless if it isn't enforced. Training is useless if it's just a box to be checked. The question is not what's written in our manuals, but whether we are building a culture where every single person is treated with dignity. Asked what she would tell other young people facing discrimination, she leaned into the microphone. You are not powerless. You have a voice. Document everything. Photos, videos, names, times. File formal complaints. Use social media to make your story heard. Know that your experience matters, whether you have a CEO for a parent or not. She paused. But I must acknowledge my privilege. I am the CEO's daughter. When I was assaulted, it became national news. Systems changed. Most people who experience this don't get that. They file a complaint, maybe get a voucher, and the problem continues for the next person. She looked directly at the senators. So my message to you, to the executives, is this. Don't wait for the next viral video. Don't wait for another person to end up in the hospital. Listen to the complaints you are already getting. Believe the passengers who are telling you there is a problem. Fix the systems that are already failing. One senator pushed back. Some critics say this focus is an overreaction, that the vast majority of flights go smoothly. Eleanor's answer was devastatingly simple. My response is a question. How many 18-year-olds need to be pushed down a jet bridge before it's not an overreaction? If discrimination happens on even 1% of flights, that is thousands of passengers being harmed every single day. How is protecting them an overreaction? The hearing room erupted in applause. As part of her sentence, Veronica Pierce began to speak at industry conferences. In Chicago, before a crowd of 300 airline personnel, she told her unvarnished truth. My name is Veronica Pierce. 6 months ago, I assaulted an 18-year-old passenger. I pushed her down a jet bridge because she was young, black, in first class, and I had decided she didn't belong. A wave of discomfort washed over the audience. I made assumptions based on nothing but the color of her skin. She was polite, respectful, and completely within her rights. and I destroyed her sense of safety because of my own racism. After her talk, people approached her. An older flight attendant said quietly, "Thank you for being honest. I've seen that bias in myself. This was a wake-up call." A gate agent told her, "I've been on the receiving end of that treatment. Seeing someone take accountability, it means something." Veronica knew she could never undo the harm she had caused, but perhaps she could prevent another Veronica from making the same mistakes. The work was far from over, but Eleanor Richardson had proven that one voice could ignite a revolution. 9 months after the assault, she boarded a plane alone for the first time. Her hands trembled as she approached the gate. This time, there was no alias. She was flying as Eleanor Richardson. The gate agent's face lit up. "Miss Richardson, it's an honor. Thank you for everything you've done." On board, the lead flight attendant, a black woman in her 30s, made her welcome announcement with a new emphasis. "Our crew is committed to a safe, respectful journey for every passenger." She caught Eleanor's eye and gave a subtle, knowing nod. Eleanor took seat 2B, the same seat. She was deliberately reclaiming it. Midway through the smooth, professional flight, the flight attendant stopped by her row. "The changes you pushed for," she said softly, "they've made a real difference. I can protect my passengers now. Thank you." "That means everything," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. On the 1-year anniversary, the New York Times published her op-ed. "Staying silent does not protect you," she wrote. "It only teaches injustice that it can continue unchallenged. Trauma can inform purpose. Accountability matters more than punishment, and systems only change when people demand better." 2 years later, Eleanor, now an intern at Skybridge's Passenger Experience Division, was on that same Seattle to Atlanta flight. She saw a flight attendant aggressively questioning a young black teenager about her carry-on bag. Eleanor stood up. "Is there a problem? That bag looks regulation size. Perhaps I should call the passenger advocacy hotline for clarification?" The flight attendant, recognizing her instantly, turned pale and apologized. The teenager looked at Eleanor, tears welling in her eyes. "You're her from the video." Eleanor smiled and handed her a card. "If anyone ever gives you trouble on any flight, you call me directly. And remember, you deserve to be here. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." She returned to seat 2B, looked out at the Seattle skyline, and opened her laptop. At the top of the screen was the title of a new document: "Proposal for a Real-Time Bias Reporting System in Aviation." The work continued. The changes were real and measurable. Independent advocacy offices were now standard. The FAA required annual anti-bias training. Complaint procedures were standardized. And across the industry, complaints of discrimination had dropped by 34%. The work of creating equitable systems is never finished. But every voice that speaks up for justice chips away at the stone. Eleanor Richardson, sitting in seat 2B, was no longer the girl who was pushed down a ramp. She was the woman who was changing an industry. Change is possible, it's just never easy.